Karen wouldn't stop stealing my garden hose, turning my peaceful neighborhood into chaos. Can I rally my neighbors and stand up to the overbearing HOA president to reclaim our community? Welcome to our channel. Please subscribe if you want more HOA stories. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm golden glow over my backyard. I loved these peaceful mornings, tending to my colorful garden. Each flower seemed to greet me with its bright petals, and the fresh scent of blossoms filled the air. My favorite tool was my green garden hose, which I used every day to keep my plants healthy and happy. It was more than just a hose. It was a symbol of the care and love I put into my garden. But lately, something strange was happening. Every morning, I would reach for my hose, only to find it missing. At first, I thought maybe I had forgotten where I had placed it. Maybe it was tangled somewhere, or perhaps a gust of wind had blown it away. I shook my head, trying to brush off the frustration. After all, gardens needed water, and I was determined to keep mine thriving. One bright Tuesday morning, as I was about to start watering my roses, I noticed the hose lying neatly on the patio. Relief washed over me. Finally, no more trouble, I thought. But my relief was short-lived. Just as I began to untangle the hose, I heard laughter from next door. Turning around, I saw Karen, my neighbor, with a big smile and a car covered in suds. "Hey there," Karen called out cheerfully. "I'm washing my car, and I borrowed your hose again. Thanks for letting me use it." I felt my frustration bubble up. "Karen, you've taken my hose 3 times this week." "I need it for my garden," I replied calmly, trying to keep my voice steady. Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, come on. It's just a hose. You shouldn't mind." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. It's not just a hose to me. I need it every day to take care of my plants. Karen laughed again, a sound that grated on my nerves. "Well, maybe you should get another one. Or better yet, join the HOA and follow the community rules like everyone else." My heart sank. The HOA, or Homeowners Association, was run by Karen. She was always bossing everyone around, making rules that seemed unfair. I wasn't part of the HOA, and I didn't like feeling controlled. "I'm not part of your association, Karen, so please stop taking my hose," I said firmly. Karen's smile faded, and her eyes narrowed slightly. "Fine, if you say so. But don't come crying to me when your garden dies." I watched her drive away, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. Why couldn't she understand how important my garden was to me? I decided to keep a closer eye on my hose from now on. Maybe there was a simple explanation, like someone else borrowing it without asking. But deep down, I knew it was Karen causing the trouble. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, I sat on my porch thinking about the day's events. My garden was my sanctuary, a place where I felt calm and happy. Losing my hose wasn't just an inconvenience. It felt like an attack on something I loved deeply. I wondered if Karen's actions were part of a bigger plan to control the neighborhood. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. I set up a small camera near my garden to see who was taking the hose. I wanted proof before I confronted Karen again. The camera was simple, but I hoped it would capture enough to show what was really happening. That afternoon, I reviewed the footage. Sure enough, I saw Karen sneaking over to my garden, taking the hose and washing her car. Her behavior was clear, and there was no denying her involvement. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. Now I had the evidence I needed, but I didn't know how to use it without causing more conflict. I decided to visit the local library to research property rights and HOA rules. I needed to understand my options and find a way to protect my garden without escalating things further. As I flipped through pages of legal documents and community guidelines, I felt more empowered. Knowledge was my best weapon against Karen's overbearing nature. Back home, I mapped out the property lines and compared them with the HOA regulations. I discovered that Karen was overstepping her boundaries, not just with my hose, but with other neighbors' properties as well. This wasn't just about a missing garden hose. It was about Karen's desire to control everything around her. That evening, I decided to reach out to a few neighbors who might be experiencing similar issues. I knocked on Mrs. Lee's door, the elderly woman who lived next to me. "Mrs. Lee, do you ever have problems with Karen?" I asked gently. She sighed, looking down at her feet. "Oh yes, Karen is always making new rules and complaining about everything. It's exhausting." Encouraged by her response, I spoke to a couple more neighbors. Some were hesitant to speak up, fearing Karen's wrath, but others admitted they had their own grievances. It seemed I wasn't alone in my struggle against her. One night, as I was about to go to bed, I heard a loud crash outside. My heart raced as I peeked through the window. Karen was in my garden, moving things around and clearly trying to make a point. She looked furious, her face red with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" I shouted, rushing outside to confront her. Karen turned to me, her eyes blazing. "I'm just making sure everyone follows the rules. Your garden is a mess, and your hose keeps disappearing. Maybe if you paid more attention, things would stay in order. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Karen, I've been doing my best to keep my garden beautiful. But you taking my hose is causing more harm than good. We need to find a way to resolve this peacefully. Karen sneered. Peacefully? You should join the HOA and follow the rules like everyone else. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows how irresponsible you are. I felt a surge of determination. I wasn't going to let Karen bully me into submission. I'm not part of your association, Karen, and I won't let you control my property. If you have a problem, let's talk to the HOA board and discuss it like reasonable neighbors. Karen's expression darkened, and she took a step closer. You think you can just ignore the HOA? They have the power here, and I'm their president. Don't test me. Before I could respond, she stormed off, leaving me standing there with a mix of fear and resolve. I knew this was just the beginning. Karen wasn't going to back down easily, and the tension in the neighborhood was growing. I needed to prepare for what was coming next. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of how to handle the situation. I decided to document every incident meticulously. Every time Karen took the hose or interfered with my garden, I would note the date, time, and details. This record would be crucial if I needed to take further action. The next morning, I received a call from the HOA board requesting a meeting. My heart skipped a beat. This was my chance to present my case, but it also meant facing Karen head-on. I prepared my notes and evidence, determined to stay calm and present my side clearly. At the meeting, the board members listened as I explained the situation. I showed them the footage from my camera and shared my documentation. The board was surprised but promised to look into the matter. Karen sat quietly, her expression unreadable. After the meeting, I felt a sense of hope. Maybe the HOA would finally address Karen's behavior. But as I left the building, I noticed Karen lurking near the entrance, watching me closely. Her presence was a reminder that the battle was far from over. That evening, as I sat by my window, I reflected on everything that had happened. My garden was more than just plants. It was a part of who I was. Losing my hose wasn't just about inconvenience, it was about respect and boundaries. I knew I had to keep fighting for what was right, no matter how difficult it became. As the days passed, Karen's actions didn't stop. She continued to take my hose and interfere with my garden, each incident more brazen than the last. The HOA board was slow to act, and the tension in the neighborhood was mounting. I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me, but I refused to give up. One morning, I woke up to find another note on my door. If you don't comply, there will be consequences. My heart pounded as I read the threatening message. This was no longer just about a garden hose. It was about standing up against someone who wanted to control every aspect of our lives. Determined to protect my garden and my peace of mind, I reached out to a local community group for support. They offered advice and resources, helping me understand my rights and the steps I could take to defend them. With their help, I felt more prepared to face Karen and the challenges ahead. As I gathered my courage, I knew that the next steps would be crucial. The conflict with Karen was escalating, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. My garden was worth fighting for, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. That night, as I looked out over my garden, I made a promise to myself. I would protect my sanctuary, no matter the cost. The battle against Karen and the HOA was just beginning, and I was ready to stand my ground. The following morning, I woke up to a peaceful garden, but I knew it wouldn't last long. Karen was watching, planning her next move. I had to stay vigilant and keep gathering evidence. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to see it through. As the sun set on another day, I felt a mix of hope and anxiety. The fight for my garden had only just begun, and the outcome was still unknown. But one thing was clear: I wasn't alone, and I wouldn't give up without a fight. The night after Karen took my garden hose, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how she kept stealing my hose and how the HOA wasn't helping. The next morning, I woke up determined to find a solution. I decided to keep a closer watch on my garden to see exactly when and how Karen was taking my hose. Every day after breakfast, I would sit in my garden with a notebook, writing down the times I saw Karen. Some days, she was gone, but on others, she was sneaking around when I wasn't looking. It was frustrating and made me feel like I couldn't relax in my own backyard. One afternoon, I saw Karen again. She was right at my fence, looking around before grabbing the hose. My heart raced. I wanted to confront her, but I knew it might make things worse. Instead, I decided to gather more evidence. I took photos of her each time she took the hose and made detailed notes about every incident. I hoped that if I had enough proof, the HOA would finally take me seriously. That evening, I sat down with my laptop and started researching HOA rules and property laws. I learned that homeowners associations have to follow certain procedures before they can enforce rules or take action against someone. I found out that Karen, as the HOA president, had a lot of influence, but she still had to follow the same rules as everyone else. The next day, I felt more confident. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to present my case. I printed out all my photos and notes, making sure everything was organized. When the day arrived, I walked to the community center, feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. At the meeting, I took a deep breath and stood up to speak. Hello, everyone. I'm here because Karen has been taking my garden hose to wash her car. I've been keeping track of every time it happens, and I have proof. I held up the photos and showed my notes to the board members and neighbors. Karen, sitting at the front, looked annoyed. "Oh, come on," she said dismissively. "It's just a hose. Why are you making such a big deal out of it?" Her tone was cold, and I could see some of the neighbors whispering to each other. I felt a pang of hurt, but stayed focused. "It's not just about the hose," I explained. "It's about respect and following the rules we all agreed to." One of the board members, Mr. Lee, leaned forward. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention," he said. "We'll look into it." But Karen wasn't done. "Maybe you should just get a new hose," she snapped. I felt my frustration rise but reminded myself to stay calm. "I prefer to resolve this peacefully," I replied. After the meeting, I talked to a few neighbors who seemed to understand my frustration. They shared their own stories about Karen's overbearing behavior and how she often ignored others' concerns. It was clear that Karen wasn't the only one who had issues with her actions. This made me feel less alone and more hopeful that we could work together to solve the problem. That night, as I was about to go to bed, I noticed a small envelope on my doorstep. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it. Inside was a note that read, "Watch your back." My stomach sank. Was Karen trying to scare me into silence? I felt a mix of fear and anger. I knew I couldn't let her intimidate me. Instead of letting the threat get to me, I decided to take action. I continued documenting every incident, and even reached out to a local lawyer to understand my rights better. The lawyer explained that taking someone's property without permission could be considered theft, and there were ways to protect myself legally. Armed with this knowledge, I felt stronger and more prepared to handle the situation. The next day, I shared the lawyer's advice with my neighbors. Together, we formed a small group dedicated to addressing Karen's behavior and other similar issues in our community. We held informal meetings in my garden, discussing our strategies and supporting each other. It felt good to have allies who believed in fairness and respect. One evening, I received a call from a local news station. They had heard about our situation and wanted to do a story on it. I was surprised but grateful for the opportunity. Sharing our story on the news felt like a big step forward. It meant that more people would know about what was happening and could support us in our fight against the unfair HOA rules. When the news aired, the response was overwhelming. Many people from nearby neighborhoods reached out to offer their support and share their own experiences with overbearing HOA boards. The media attention put pressure on the HOA to take our complaints seriously. I felt a surge of hope, knowing that we were no longer alone in this fight. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere had changed. Board members were more attentive, and some even expressed concern about the negative publicity. I presented the evidence again, along with the support we had from the community and the media. Karen tried to defend herself, but it was clear that her influence was waning under the spotlight. Mr. Lee addressed the room. "We need to ensure that our HOA is fair and respectful to all members. We'll review our policies and take appropriate action." Karen looked uneasy, and I could tell she was realizing that her actions were no longer acceptable. The meeting ended on a positive note, with promises to make changes and prevent future issues. As I left the meeting, a few neighbors came up to me to thank me for standing up. Their kind words made me feel proud and validated. It wasn't just about the garden hose anymore. It was about creating a community where everyone felt respected and heard. That night, I reflected on how far we had come, from feeling helpless and frustrated to taking control and making a difference. It was an emotional journey. I knew there was still work to be done, but I felt more determined than ever to continue fighting for a fair and respectful neighborhood. Just then, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Karen. "Can we talk?" she wrote. My heart raced. Was she finally ready to make things right? Or was this another trick to undermine me? I took a deep breath and decided to respond, hopeful that this could be the start of a positive change. As I typed my reply, I felt a mix of anxiety and optimism. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew I wasn't alone. With the support of my neighbors and the backing of the community, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Little did I know, this conversation with Karen would lead to an unexpected turn that would change our neighborhood forever. The night was quiet, but I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the note I found on my door. "Watch your back." I felt a chill run down my spine. What if Karen wasn't just stealing my garden hose? Was she trying to send me a message? I knew I had to take action, but I wasn't sure where to start. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to gather my thoughts. I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop. I started researching local laws about property and borrowing. To my surprise, I found that taking someone else's property without permission was illegal. This was my chance to stand up for myself. I remembered the property maps I had seen when I first moved in. They clearly showed the boundaries of my land. I printed out a copy and compared it with the new rules the HOA had been enforcing. There were discrepancies. Some of the new rules didn't match the actual property lines. This meant the HOA might not have the authority to enforce those rules. Feeling more confident, I decided to reach out to a local lawyer who specialized in property rights. After a brief phone call, we set up a meeting. At the lawyer's office, I explained everything. She listened carefully and then said, "We have a strong case here. With the evidence you've gathered, we can challenge the HOA's actions." I felt a surge of hope, but I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed the support of my neighbors. The next day, I went door to door, talking to those who had also been bothered by Karen's behavior. Some were hesitant at first, but as I shared my findings and the potential legal action, more people agreed to help. We were forming a united front. One evening, I decided to set up a camera in my garden to catch Karen in the act. I wanted solid proof to present to the HOA and the lawyer. The first few days, nothing happened, and I began to lose hope. But then, late one night, the camera captured Karen sneaking over and taking my garden hose again. My heart raced as I watched the footage. This was the evidence I needed. With the video in hand, I felt ready to confront Karen once more. I attended the next HOA meeting, where Karen was also present. The room was tense as I stood up to speak. "Karen, I have proof that you've been taking my garden hose without permission," I said calmly, showing the video to everyone. Karen's face flushed with anger. "That's none of your business," she snapped. "You're just overreacting." The HOA board members looked uncomfortable. They hadn't expected me to have such clear evidence. I continued. "Taking someone's property is not acceptable, and it's against our community rules." Karen tried to defend herself, but the room was silent. The board members exchanged glances, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. I could see the support in my neighbor's eyes, and it gave me strength to keep speaking. After the meeting, the board decided to review the evidence. They apologized for not addressing the issue sooner and promised to take action against Karen. But Karen wasn't finished. She threatened to sue me for invading her privacy by setting up the camera. This only made things more complicated. Feeling determined, I didn't back down. I knew that standing up for my rights was the right thing to do. I continued to document every incident and gathered more support from my neighbors. Together, we attended more HOA meetings, shared our stories, and showed the evidence of Karen's actions. The community support was growing, and our voices were becoming harder to ignore. One afternoon, I received a call from the local news station. They had heard about our situation and wanted to do a feature story. I agreed, hoping that media attention would put more pressure on the HOA and Karen to resolve the issue fairly. On the day of the interview, I spoke about how Karen's actions were affecting not just me, but the entire neighborhood. The reporter was sympathetic and promised to highlight our struggle. When the news aired, it created a buzz in the community. More neighbors came forward with their own stories of Karen's overbearing behavior. The HOA board realized they couldn't ignore the mounting pressure from both the community and the media. They decided to take more serious action against Karen. Despite the challenges, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I had stood up for myself and my neighbors, showing that we wouldn't tolerate unfair treatment. The lawyer worked with us to ensure that the HOA followed the proper procedures and respected everyone's property rights. As the weeks went by, the situation began to improve. The HOA implemented clearer rules that matched the actual property lines, and Karen was officially warned about her behavior. She seemed less aggressive, though the tension between us remained. One evening, as I was tending to my garden, Karen approached me. She looked different, less angry and more tired. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. "Maybe I went too far. I'm sorry for taking your hose and causing trouble." I took a deep breath and nodded. "Thank you, Karen. I appreciate your apology." It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a step in the right direction. We both knew that building a better relationship would take time, but at least there was a willingness to change. With the immediate issue resolved, I focused on strengthening the community. We organized neighborhood cleanups and social gatherings, fostering a sense of unity and cooperation. The once tense environment became more friendly and supportive, proving that together we could overcome any challenge. Looking back, I realized how much I had grown through this experience. I had learned the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. I had also discovered the power of community and how much we could achieve when we worked together. As I watered my garden with my own hose, free from worry, I felt a deep sense of peace. The struggles with Karen had brought out the best in our neighborhood, reminding us all of the value of respect and understanding. I knew that no matter what future challenges arose, we would face them together, stronger and more united than ever before.